I want to begin with your name. I think that is the most interesting part because when I first met you, that story that you told me was what really lit my brain on fire. I'm like, oh, interesting. I'm from Nigeria and I didn't know this. So your name is quite unique. Peter Kolade. Kolade is Nigerian Yoruba, so that's normal. Fashesin Sousa. That's different. Tell us about the name. Where is that name from? Why do you have that name?
Yeah, it's interesting, and you will never find anyone else with that combination of names apart from someone from my family. So it helps to be unique wherever you go. I don't know how many people know about the legacies of slavery outside of North America. I don't think it's a very popular story.
Yeah, I can say it's definitely not that popular outside of North America. When I was doing basic Nigerian history, I learned a little bit more about it, but I realized that it was extremely brutal, way more brutal than up north, in the sense that they were literally killing slaves off regularly and they just didn't see them as humans. I know the North Americans didn't see them as humans, but they were trying to breed slaves in South America. From what I studied, they were just happy to let them die and get more in.
Yeah, it was more brutal, but that's the past experience. But we then had abolition of slavery in North America and Caribbean. It took another, I believe it's about 50 years before slavery was abolished in South America, so Brazil, Argentina, and those countries. After that, the slaves had the option to stay there or go back to wherever they could identify as home. There were some people who made that brave journey to go back to their homeland. Settled in, first of all, it was a very tough journey back. Buy ticket, buy your way onto a ship, and then make the journey back, which I think took, I'm not sure if it's 3 weeks or 3 months, but I have to go back and read the books I read about it again. But it was a long time. Some people died on the journey. Some people were really old coming back, and then you had some young children that came back. So there's a particular book that I have called Waterhouse, right? We talked about the journey of a young girl who came back on the ship and arrived in Lagos. And when they arrived, they were quarantined for about 2 weeks on the ship by the colonial masters at the time. So quarantined to ensure that they didn't had any illness or anything like that before they were allowed onto the mainland. Now, the whole community of them came back and settled in a place on Lagos Island. It was called Brazilian Quarters at the time, but now it's a commercial part of Lagos called Marina, right? Mostly skyscrapers there.
Oh.
Yeah. At that time, the houses that were built by these Brazilians, returnees as they call them, were of the style that you will find in Portugal or in Brazil, because that's the trade. That's how they learned how to build houses. Yeah, so many of the people that came back, now they couldn't really, well, they had two identities, right? You had the identity that you brought back from Brazil and that you had with your homeland. So a lot of them kept Brazilian names. So you had Da Silva, Da Costa, Fernandez, those kind of names. So you'll probably have met somebody that comes from Lagos who has that kind of surname, but will then have a Yoruba name. There are quite a few of them. My uncle and his family, they just kept the full Da Souza name. But my dad was the child of a second wife. So he chose to have her surname in addition to his surname, and that combined to Fashesin Sousa. So the Fashesin part is from Ilesha in Nigeria, which is outside of Lagos. And that's where his mom was from. That combination is how that came about. And of course, my first name, Peter, I was born baptized as a Catholic. Most of those, the Brazilians, that Catholicism was the prevailing religion. Raised a Catholic, and I just kept that name. It does help in the UK, actually. It makes life less complicated when you have an English name. But
I see.
There you go.
Interesting. I guess Kolade is your Yoruba name.
That is my Yoruba name. It means, the full name is Oluwa Kolade, which means God has brought wealth.
Does anyone call you that at all?
Yeah, most of my mates from secondary school.
Okay, so they didn't go the pizza route.
No, my mates from university, not because my secondary school mates called me, more than call me Peter, because I didn't really have a choice at the time. It was what wasn't your parents put down as your name. But when I got to university, I went to University of Ibadan. Then I consciously asked that I introduce myself as Kolade, not Peter. You would have people that know me as different things. Some just know me as Souza. There's a book called The Adventures of Souza. It was one of the books that we all read in primary school or to secondary school, the literature books, Adventures of Souza. Souza was a very notorious naughty child that was always getting into trouble, just like Bino or
Dennis the Menace.
Dennis the Menace. Yeah, there's a book about it. It's an old book about this troublesome child called Souza. I'm called different things at different places, but it's one of the three.
I think is very interesting, the Catholic side, because I don't know many Yoruba Catholics. I know a lot of Igbo Catholics because of the missionaries that went over to the southeast during colonial times were mostly Catholics, right? So I know a lot of Igbo Catholics. Yoruba Christians tend to not be Catholics, but it's so interesting that the Catholic side was still retained from colonial time, of their time in Brazil and returning from Brazil, because almost everybody in South America is like Catholic, aren't they? Like Latinas and Latino people, they're just...
It's very Catholic. That's when we know you've got that statue of the Jesus statue in Rio. That's a huge symbol of faith that they have. Right. And interestingly, though, what the slaves did then was they were forced to abandon their religion, their traditional religions from Africa, and they were forced to become Catholic. What they did was now to match the different saints with African deities.
Oh, with the Yoruba gods.
Exactly. So when they're talking about Saint Peter, Saint Matthew, they had a matching deity, Yoruba god, that they were also worshipping at the same time. So there's this face, it's called I think it's Candomblé or something like that. It's a blend between Catholicism and African religion. If you go to Brazil, I think it's in Salvador or Bahia, you will find a lot of that faith being practiced there.
Interesting. To be fair, I guess I shouldn't be so surprised that the Catholicism remained and came from Brazil, because when I think about how South America got colonized, it was mostly with the Portuguese and Spanish, right? They were both like beholden to the Pope. They both went to the Pope and be like, oh, it's our responsibility to colonize the world and bring the infidels to justice. And everything that they were doing,
crusades and all that,
was sanctioned by the Pope, basically. I guess it's normal that Catholicism plays a big part in South America, especially considering they went over to South America and really stayed there, whereas the British and those guys went more to North America. I guess when they were doing it, they weren't using corporations. They were using the power of monarchy, the power of the Pope. Because I think the reason why the British were so successful in doing this was because they started doing what the Dutch were doing. It became capitalism, and they were just like, it's all about making money and anybody can invest in slavery, basically. Wow. That's so wild to say today. Invest in slavery. Wow.
I mean, I was at the Liverpool Slavery Museum, and you could actually look into the ledgers of the different expeditions, where you would have the names of the investors and how much each person put down for that voyage to go on that expedition, as we call it. But there's a whole massive story of how that played out that hasn't been properly told yet. The commercial side of it, from getting the cowrie shells from the South Pacific, taking that to Europe, trading the cowries on exchanges, like right now you're trading gold or metal or whatever on the commodities exchange. People will then buy those cowries and then use them to go on these voyages, to go and do the slave trade, buy them.
That is so interesting. I remember in the past, they used to say that cowrie shells were like money. But were they really seen as money by the British?
No, by the Africans. Cowries had religious significance or spiritual significance. It was a symbol of fertility, right? The more cowries you have adorning your garments, the more fertile you will be, and then the more children you have, and that means that community will grow. You have more resources to farm, to do whatever it is. So the more cowries you had, the better. Cowries were seen as good value. They were being extracted from the Pacific Ocean. Cowrie shells. So now there's extraction of oil, right, for powering industry. Back then, the extraction was the shells. And that was then shipped in bulk and taken to Europe to be traded on the exchanges.
Why?
Let's say you buy 1,000 bags of cowries for £50, right? That's 1,000 bags of cowries. What you can do with that when you actually go to West Africa to then trade and buy the slaves, you get so much more money from it, right? Just like you're doing a currency exchange. You're going to Europe, so you buy euros.
Yeah. Just thinking about this and hearing about this just annoys me and angers me so much, because this is another example in my head of them taking advantage of us. The cowrie shells situation was like more of a spiritual element.
It was rare at the time. No, it was used for trading. You could buy and sell with it, but it was scarce. But what then happened was that because to fuel the slave trade, they now wait to get huge volumes of it to then be able to buy as many.
Basically, they weren't even trading for something useful. They were just getting everything for free because all they had to do was go into the ocean, dig up a whole bunch of shells.
It wasn't easy to extract it in that volume, but yes, pretty much. Oh, you can say oil is free, right? If you say someone just goes and digs it from the ground, what does the hope to get?
But I mean, in today's day and age, when I'm in Nigeria, cowrie shells are everywhere.
Yeah, because people don't, there's no value to it now. It's not a recognized medium of exchange, right? I mean, you can buy them on Amazon. You can buy plastic ones of it and put it on your hair if you want.